I was banned from my sister's wedding for being shameful, but she embarrassed herself. I never imagined that the worst humiliation of my life would come from the one I loved most. When my sister Olivia looked at me with disdain and told me in front of the whole family that I was too shameful to be part of her wedding, something inside me broke. I knew it would be difficult, but no one, not even her, knew how much I was about to change. And in the end, it wasn't me who ended up ashamed. If you believe that justice always arrives, leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next plot twist stories. I never imagined that the greatest pain of my life would come from where I least expected. When my sister, Savannah, looked me in the eyes and said, with a coldness that unsettled me, that I couldn't go to her wedding, the feeling of betrayal was deep. But it wasn't just any reason. She called me shameful. I could barely breathe. Her words were like blades, sharp and precise, and the worst part was that it came from someone I had always considered my best friend, my confidant. "You don't have class. You'll never understand," she said. I don't remember saying anything at that moment. I just felt my body freeze, as if the world was spinning too fast for me to keep up. Savannah had always been the star of the family. Since we were little, our mother said she had a special glow. I, on the other hand, was always the forgotten sister, the one who stayed in the shadows. Even so, I was always loyal to her, supporting her in everything. When she married Jack, a guy I always considered superficial, I thought, okay, she's happy. That's what matters. But time passed and something was changing in her. She started pulling away, becoming someone I didn't recognize anymore. Family gatherings became fewer, messages became shorter, and over time turned into a simple hi or how are you? All of this affected me deeply, but I never abandoned her. I wanted to be there for her, especially because when our parents passed away, she and I became everything to each other. Her wedding seemed like the chance to reconnect, to retrieve the bond we had lost over the years. I thought that somehow she still saw me as an important part of her life. I was wrong. The first time I realized something was wrong was when I was excluded from all the wedding-related conversations. She and her friends, who used to treat me as part of the group, started avoiding my presence. It was as if I was a ghost. When, finally, I received a formal invitation to the wedding, I was relieved but also nervous. I didn't know how she felt about me now. The doubt ate at me, but I wanted to believe I could still be the same sister from before, the one who stood by her during the most important moments. The week before the big day, I finally understood what was happening. Savannah called me for a conversation, and it was there at that moment that everything collapsed. "I don't want you at my wedding, Sarah," she began, direct and cold. I tried to stay calm, but deep down I knew something was terribly wrong. "You don't have the profile. You don't have class, Sarah. Your behavior, well, it just doesn't match." Her words kept echoing in my mind like a distant echo. I tried to stay strong, but it was hard. I didn't understand. I couldn't understand. "What?" was all I could respond. "You're a disgrace, Sarah," she said. My world stopped at that second. Her words hit me like a punch in the stomach. I, who had always been by her side, who had always supported her choices, her decisions, was now the villain of the story. I couldn't understand. How had I gotten to this point? How could the sister who had shared all the important moments of my life treat me this way? The pain became almost physical. A warm, suffocating sensation rising at my chest, making me feel like I couldn't breathe. How could someone I loved so much hurt me this way? The most ironic thing about all of this is that, before everything, I always knew Savannah had this side. The competitive side, the side that liked to be the center of attention, the side that cared more about appearances and what others thought than the people who were truly by her side. I knew this, but somehow I still believed we were sisters, and that would unite us above everything else. But I was so wrong. What I thought was a relationship of mutual support, affection, and understanding dissolved in an instant. I was discarded like an old piece of clothing, something that no longer fit the standards she had built for herself. At that moment, while she looked at me as if she were getting rid of a tiresome task, I felt a part of me break. I tried to stay strong, but the tears started falling, heavy and hot. I couldn't believe what was happening. How could this be real? It was as if for years I had believed in something that had never existed. As if our history, our friendship, our bond had been an illusion. I left there without saying a word. The next day was a blur. I went home, locked myself in my room, trying to understand all of it. How could my sister, with whom I shared so many moments, do this to me? I, who had always been by her side, even when she made choices I didn't understand. But at that moment, it didn't matter anymore. Everything seemed lost. The emptiness inside me was as vast as the pain. I didn't know what to do with it. My friends, my family, no one could help me because no one knew what I was going through. I didn't know how to tell them what was happening, because deep down it was a pain I couldn't explain. And the worst part, I knew it wouldn't be the end. I knew that was just the beginning of something bigger, something that would change me in ways I couldn't yet understand. But at that moment, all I wanted was to understand the reason behind that. Betrayal. What I felt was an emptiness so deep it seemed nothing could fill it. The emptiness of rejection, of betrayal, of the pain of being despised by someone I believed would never do this. I was lost, but something inside me told me there was still more to come. Something I didn't know how to handle, but that would change me forever. I was still in shock when I got home that night. The pain in my chest wouldn't let me breathe properly. Her words were still echoing in my mind like a sound that wouldn't dissipate. Shameful. No class. It kept repeating endlessly. And what bothered me the most, what tore me apart in such a cruel way, was that I didn't know why. Why did she feel that way? Why was my presence, something that had always been so natural, now an affront? I couldn't understand. I couldn't dot in the following days. My life turned into a complete fog. Work no longer attracted me, and I could barely focus on anything that wasn't the image of Savannah looking at me with disdain. I tried distracting myself with friends, but even they began to avoid me. I didn't know if it was because of my tired appearance or my energy, but I realized that little by little I was being pushed aside. When my best friend, Kelly, called me, she tried to be kind, but it was clear she was pulling away. "I just wanted to see how you were," she said. But the hesitation in her voice made me realize that even she had taken a step back. Work became unbearable. I, who had always been a cheerful person, who smiled easily and maintained a positive outlook, suddenly found myself swallowed by sadness and discomfort. The gallery where I worked started to feel my absence, not physically, but mentally. I was there, but I wasn't present. My boss, Linda, gave me the opportunity to lead an important project, but the pressure of knowing that at any moment I could be let go for not delivering what was expected of me made me collapse. Every meeting, every disapproving look, every awkward silence felt like an extra punishment, and the hardest part was that no one seemed to understand what was going on. No one knew about the conversation with Savannah. No one knew about the humiliation I had suffered. I couldn't talk about it because when I tried, the words seemed too small. How could I explain the pain that was inside me? How could I tell someone that I was despised for being who I am? Every time I tried to talk about what was happening, I felt like I was digging a deeper hole, burying myself in my own pain. So instead, I just kept quiet. Then one day at work, I saw the invitation to Savannah's wedding. She still sent it to me as some sort of pity trophy. I was invited to watch the event from afar, as a mere spectator of her life. I looked at that invitation and felt a silent anger taking over me. How dare she do this? How could she send me an invitation after everything? The anger and the pain mixed within me, creating a cold, controlled fury. I knew what it meant, but I wasn't ready to give in. The night of the wedding was approaching, and with every passing minute, my agony increased. I didn't want to go, but at the same time, I couldn't ignore what was happening. Her wedding was the event of the year in the town. Everyone would be there, and once again, I would be left aside. What did I expect? that someone would apologize. To me, that Savannah would regret it. No, I knew that wouldn't happen. She was in her bubble, taking care of what was most important to her, the image she wanted to project on the day of the wedding. When I arrived at the venue, the luxury was overwhelming. Everything seemed perfect. The impeccable decorations, the bridal gown that dazzled, Savannah's smile. That cold and artificial smile, as if she were putting on the I am perfect mask and waiting for everyone to believe it. I couldn't help it. When I entered the room, all eyes turned to me. They didn't say anything, but it was as if I was invisible and at the same time too visible. Shame began to invade me, but I kept my head up. If she didn't want my presence there, then I would show her that I didn't need her approval. She wouldn't take away my dignity, but as the minutes passed, my body seemed to want to scream. I felt like I didn't belong there. Not because I wasn't well dressed or because I didn't know how to act, but because the atmosphere around me was heavy with invisible judgment. Conversations stopped when I passed by, and I could feel the unspoken words. Here comes the bride's sister. What kind of person comes here after being kicked out? I wanted to scream, but I swallowed the words. The wedding was for her, not. For me, the moment was hers, and she could do whatever she wanted with it. When Savannah entered the room, everyone stood up to applaud, and the camera flashes captured her in all her perfection. She was radiant, but the pain I felt was irreversible. I didn't matter to her, but she didn't know what she was losing. I had been her companion, her friend, and now I was a stranger. Once again, the eyes turned to me, expecting something I didn't have to give. I just looked into the void dot, what would happen next. I didn't know. But one thing was certain. I was starting to realize that something inside me was breaking and rebuilding. I didn't know how yet, but that night would be a turning point. And the big turnaround was about to happen. I didn't know it, but life had plans for me, plans that even I couldn't imagine. I returned home that night with the feeling that something inside me had broken. Savannah's wedding was everything I feared, and then some. The pain of being ignored, of being a stranger in my own family, of being rejected by the one I loved. Most was unbearable, but life didn't stop because of that. I couldn't just sink into the pain and wait for it to pass. I knew I had to move on, but I didn't know how to. In the days that followed, I found what seemed to be a temporary solace in a small recipe book. It was something I found in one of my mother's drawers, and it was all that remained of her kitchen. The records of the dishes she made with so much love. I had always been fascinated by the way she prepared meals, so dedicated, putting her heart into everything she did. I, however, had never really tried cooking. My mom always did everything, while I observed from afar. But at that moment, something caught my attention. I needed to find something that was mine. Something where I could invest my energy and somehow rebuild myself. The first dish I tried making was a simple baked rice, our mother's favorite recipe. I was so tense, so anxious that I could barely concentrate. But for some reason, the act of cutting the ingredients, stirring the spices, and watching everything come together slowly brought me a sense of peace. Not that it was easy. I made mistakes several times. The seasonings didn't turn out like my mom's. The texture was never perfect, but every attempt made me feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Control. I was in charge of something. In that moment, although simple, was mine. In the first few days, my attempts were disastrous. The rice burned, the meats were undercooked, the vegetables wilted. I felt frustrated, but I was also determined to keep going. Something inside me told me that the kitchen could be a metaphor for my own life. I was broken, wrong in many ways, but I could still rebuild myself. I could learn from the mistakes and keep trying. And it was in the simplicity of a pot that I began to feel the strength of a new beginning. The following weeks were difficult, but also revealing. I started working in a small local restaurant, something I never imagined I would do. I was embarrassed to tell anyone what was going on in my life, so I stayed silent. What gave me pleasure, in fact, was knowing that I was creating something with my own hands. Every dish I prepared had a piece of me in it. I was no longer the excluded sister, the woman without direction. I was learning, growing, and most importantly, I was doing it on my own. The job at the restaurant wasn't glamorous. I spent long hours in the kitchen, chopping, sauteing, seasoning, but there was something liberating in it. I was dedicating myself to something that had nothing to do with my past, nothing to do with the image everyone had of me. I was no longer Sarah, the rejected sister. I was Sarah, the cook, the woman who was rising from the depths. And when people started noticing my food, when they began complimenting the taste of my dishes, I felt a growing strength inside me. It wasn't just about the food. It was about the recognition of my effort, of my worth, but as it always happens, the past didn't stay behind so easily. One day, while I was preparing a special dish for a customer, I felt someone watching. Me. When I turned around, I came face to face with a face I never imagined I'd see again. Livia. She was standing there, in the kitchen doorway, with an expression somewhere between surprise and regret. I froze for a moment, not knowing what to do. She, in turn, looked different. There was no longer that arrogant look. She seemed vulnerable. But more than anything, she seemed lost. Sarah, she began, and her voice sounded different, softer than I remembered. I know I hurt you. I should never have done that. I was blind, and I didn't see how I hurt you. I looked at her for a moment, absorbing her words, but something inside me stayed firm. It was no longer about what she had done, but about who I had become. I had already given everything I could to that relationship. Livia, you don't understand, I said, not angrily, but with a deep calm. You didn't just do this once, you know? You did it throughout our entire lives. Used me when it suited you and ignored me when it didn't fit. I don't have room for that anymore. She fell silent, her eyes filled with tears. What did she want from me? Forgiveness? Redemption? I knew this wasn't the moment to change the course of my life. Not to please her, not anymore. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry, she said, but the truth was, I didn't need that anymore. What I needed was to continue my own reconstruction without depending on her approval. Deep down, I knew that what she offered me was no longer enough. I was on a path with no turning back, and no matter how hard she tried, nothing could reverse what had happened. And so, with a discreet smile and a sense of peace, I said goodbye to her. Not with resentment, but with the lightness of someone who had finally realized that she was in control of her own life. I had overcome what I thought was insurmountable. And although she was still standing at my door, I knew that things had changed forever. Time passed, and with each day, my body and mind grew stronger. At the restaurant, I started to stand out. The simple fact of being there, doing what I loved, gave me a sense of belonging I had never experienced before. It wasn't just about cooking, it was about creating, about seeing myself in a way I never had before. When the chef, James, asked me to lead the preparation of a special event at the restaurant, a small wedding party, I knew I had reached a turning point. I was no longer Sarah, the one who stayed in the shadow of my sister. I was a woman, a professional, with something valuable to offer, and it was at this event that the recognition I quietly sought began to materialize. The party was flawless, the food was delicious, and people began asking who the cook responsible was. The most sincere compliment came from a customer, a local food influencer, who, after tasting one of my dishes, said it was an explosion of flavor and that she had to share it with her followers. I smiled, knowing that this was just the beginning. Something that had started deep within my soul was now blooming. I was no longer a shadow in anyone's life. I was a woman in my own right, with a story to tell. That very night, when the event was winding down and the room was starting to empty, a name came to mind. Livia. I thought about her, but quickly pushed the thought away. I was no longer concerned with what she thought or the shame she tried to impose on me. The most important thing was that I was finally rising again, that it was then, in the middle of the party, that someone appeared behind me. I was organizing the last few things in the kitchen when I heard a familiar voice. Sarah? I turned around, And there she was, Livia, once again. She seemed different, but still, that sight brought a tightness to my chest. She no longer seemed arrogant or distant. She seemed human. Tired, fragile, as if the weight of everything she had done was falling on her. But it was no longer my sister looking for me. It was someone who I felt needed something, maybe forgiveness, maybe an explanation, maybe even a new chance to be in my life. You look. Well, she began hesitantly. I saw the article in the newspaper about the event. My friends told me you were doing well, that you were succeeding. I took a deep breath before responding. You know how much you hurt me, Livia, but today I'm not that girl anymore, waiting for your approval. I don't need you to tell me how good I am, because I already know that. I found my path, and honestly, I don't need you to be happy anymore. She looked at me, her eyes now sincere, but there was something in her gaze I couldn't ignore. Regret? Guilt? I couldn't say I just knew it didn't matter. Not anymore. I had become a whole person, and I didn't need anyone's validation to continue my journey. Livia, still visibly affected, hesitated for a moment before speaking. I wanted you to know that I'm sorry, not just for what happened between us, but for the way I treated you. You were my sister, and I pushed you out of my life as if you meant nothing. And I see now how wrong I was. But I know I can't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know that. I looked at her not with anger, but with a firmness that reflected my own transformation. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need anything from her to feel that justice had already been done. I don't know if I can forgive you, Livia, but don't worry. I've already moved on, and that's all that matters. She nodded slowly, absorbing my words. It was no longer about her. It was about me. I was no longer seeking reconciliation. Because I had already reconciled with myself, those words she said, I'm sorry, no longer held the weight they might have a few months ago. I didn't feel anger nor hatred. I just felt a lightness that came from within. I was free. And seeing Livia there, trying to apologize, something inside me was set free. I knew my redemption had already happened. I didn't need anything else. The forgiveness I had longed for was inside me all along. Before I walked away, she touched my arm with a gesture that seemed sincere. I just hope one day you'll understand, she said, her voice trembling. I looked at her one last time. I already understand, Livia. I already understand. And with that, I turned and walked away. Not with anger, but with the sense that I was finally leaving the weight of the past behind. I was becoming someone different, stronger, more whole. And what more could I ask for except that? Time passed, and things continued to change for me in ways I never imagined. I was becoming more and more comfortable with who I had become, with the choices I made and with the life I was rebuilding. My work at the restaurant was flourishing. I was already recognized in the city, and everything that seemed lost during those months of pain was now a distant past. When I started to see the fruits of my dedication, it was as if the weight of the world had lifted off my shoulders. I had become someone I never imagined being, a woman proud of her journey, her strength, and above all, her independence. However, as it always happens in life, fate somehow always brings us back to the path of those who, in some way, were part of our story. Not long after the last time I saw Livia, she reappeared, and this time, it wasn't an unexpected visit. She sought me out again, but this time, it wasn't for apologies. I realized this the moment she walked into the restaurant. She entered with her head down, but she no longer seemed like the woman full of pride who rejected me months ago. She seemed defeated, tired. She approached my table with a different expression. I, who had already emotionally distanced myself from everything involving her, didn't know what to expect. When she saw me, her eyes, once filled with pride, were now full of a kind of humility that only pain can teach. Sarah, she said, with a voice so soft it barely resembled the voice of the sister I knew. I know everything I did was wrong. I know I no longer have the right to ask for anything. But I'm really in a difficult situation. She was fragile, vulnerable in a way I never imagined seeing. She was no longer the strong woman who controlled everything. She was a woman who had fallen. And what surprised me the most was that she was there, asking for help. "I need a job, Sarah," she said, her eyes filled with regret. "I don't have anyone to trust anymore, and I know I can be a good kitchen assistant or do anything that would allow me to start over. I can't stand this loneliness anymore. I've lost everything." The pain in her eyes was genuine, but still, I knew that what she wanted wasn't simply help. She wanted me to be the bridge to her redemption. And right there, in that moment, I realized something important. Life gives us many chances, and sometimes it places us in front of people who, deep down, never understood our worth. Livia had destroyed me, rejected me, and now she was asking for something I knew she didn't deserve. I took a deep breath and, without showing anger or bitterness, looked at her and said, with all the calm I could gather, "I can't help you, Livia. Not in the way you expect. You made choices, and they come with a price, but I'm no longer the person you knew. I've moved on. And that's what you need to do too." She remained silent, the weight of my words hitting her hard. I knew she expected something more from me, maybe forgiveness, maybe a second chance, but I no longer had that to give. It wasn't revenge, it wasn't bitterness. It was simply the realization that I didn't need her to move forward. I had already rebuilt myself, already redeemed myself. It wasn't about her anymore. It was about me. She stood there, not knowing what to say. And I, with a feeling of lightness in my chest, turned to go back to work. Deep down, I knew that would be the last time I would see her. I had offered what I could, which was the truth. And nothing more. As she walked away, something inside me told me that this was real justice. It wasn't about forgiveness nor help. It was about learning to rise on your own. And my silent victory was precisely that. I, Sarah, the woman who had been banished, humiliated, rejected, was now standing, stronger than I ever imagined. And I didn't need anything else to know that. In the end, it was her who was left with shame. Not me. The story didn't end with an act of revenge, but with a simple gesture of autonomy and strength. My life now had a new meaning, and that's what I wanted her to understand. There is no redemption for those who try to take from you what you should never have lost. I looked at the sky as night fell. Something in me finally quieted. I was at peace, and this in itself was the greatest victory I could ever achieve.